destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th of 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Freefall Show, and I am Bernie Suarez, and I'm here with Andy Steele. And we're coming to you on shortwave radio, courtesy WWCR. And Andy, I'm glad to be back for yet another show of 9/11 Freefall.
I'm very happy to be back, too. We've had 2 great episodes in the past, and they're only getting better.
Exactly. And, well, we'd like to remind our audience, we want to first of all thank our audience for listening in. You're tuned in to the 9/11 Freefall Show. And what we do here, this show is dedicated to the truth of 9/11. We're dedicated to the focusing on the science of 9/11. And we also like to bring attention to architects and engineers, a organization of volunteers founded by Richard Gage, a member of AIA, and a bunch of volunteers that have gotten together since 2007 and made this organization a focus of 9/11 truth with regards to the science of 9/11. And we like to also mention to our listeners, Architects and Engineers is an organization that can be found at AE911truth.org. You can go to that website and see all about the organization. Right now, 1,700 architects and engineers, licensed architects and engineers, have signed on to demand a new investigation of 9/11. And there's a reason for that, Andy, and that's because all the science points in one direction.
That's right, Bernie. You can't really argue with science, and that is why Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth is one of the major leaders in the 9/11 Truth movement.
We are hitting the issues of 9/11 with respect to the truth and the science of 9/11, and we want to do the best that we can to reach out to everyone in our quest for justice and accountability and truth. For this show, I wanted to get into with our audience. Andy, we talked a little bit about this before the show, and I wanted to focus this week on some basic things. And what kinds of basic things am I talking about? Something that those 1,700 architects and engineers who signed a petition abide by, and this thing that many scientists and scholars have abided by, and it is a rule book of science. And you know, we talk about science, and we know that there's a lot of opposition out there and a lot of claims out there with respect to 9/11 and what really happened on that day. But how can we possibly have any sense of direction without a set of rules? And I'm talking about the scientific method. And the scientific method, Andy, to me is the blueprint by which we should be going by when we're making any claims whatsoever with respect to the events of 9/11.
Well, absolutely. You know, things like the scientific method are not, they exist to teach people how to think, how to analytically approach a problem. And these are things that we learn when we're kids or growing up in elementary school and then up into middle school. You know, we learn certain things like the scientific method because it tells you how to approach a problem from small to big. And obviously 9/11 and the question of what actually destroyed the Twin Towers in World Trade Center 7 it qualifies as the big problem. All right. But this is the reason that we learn things like logic puzzles in math class, you know, when you do that if A, then B kind of thinking, because it trains your mind on how to look at things unemotionally, how to look at them from a logical perspective so that you can arrive at the truth.
Exactly. And thankfully, the scientific method is still around today. It is still very applicable, and it is still the measure by which the tool by which we measure scientific evidence and truth. And we just taking a minute to focus on the scientific method, I want to read from a passage, one definition of the scientific method that is worth reading out, and it reads like this. The scientific method refers to a body of techniques for investigating phenomenon, acquiring new knowledge, or correcting and integrating previous knowledge. To be termed scientific, a method of inquiry must be based on gathering empirical and measurable evidence. And that evidence is subject to specific principles of reasoning. And the Oxford English Dictionary, by the way, says that scientific method is, quote, a method of procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century, consisting in systematic observation, measurement, and experiment, and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypothesis. Now, that may sound like a lot, but quite frankly, the scientific method is intended as a simple tool by which scientists are allowed to make claims and prove those claims to be legitimate claims. And the reason we're talking about the scientific method is, I feel, and many of us do, that the lack of understanding of what the scientific method is all about has contributed, at the very least, to the gross and mass amount of disinformation that's out there with respect to the events of 9/11. And as we have said, and we will take some time to talk about that today, the National Institute of Standards and Technology is the organization, part of the Department of Commerce of the U.S., that was tasked with figuring out how the World Trade Center towers came down. And anyone who does their due diligence and does their homework and studies the method used by the National Institute of Standards and Technology can only come away realizing that there was no observation of the scientific method. What do you think about that?
Well, absolutely. And you know, the reason that we bring this up and why the scientific method is so important to reiterate in the case of 9/11, because when you listen to it, it seems like a lot of just basic common sense reasoning. You know, it's like, yeah, obviously you think in these terms, you think in these kind of steps when you're trying to approach a problem. But unfortunately, in the case of September 11th, a lot of Americans didn't do that. And I'm guilty of this myself. You know, just to go into a quick story, when on the day of September 11th, I actually watched Building 7 fall live on television. You know, I didn't have anywhere to go that day. I was tuned in for the whole event, and I was watching it, and my roommate had come in because he actually had to get something done that day during all of this. And, you know, I'm telling him what happened, and I'm saying, you know, they just brought down a building to control the fire or something. My brain wasn't thinking logically on that day, and a lot of people's weren't either. I didn't think into account, even though what I saw looked like a controlled demolition, and I thought it was, my brain didn't go into the area that says, well, how can they set up a controlled demolition with the Twin Towers just having collapsed and set this all up in a morning? So I wasn't, you know, thinking along those logical lines, and so weren't a lot of Americans at that time, and they still aren't on this topic, because there is a lot involved with it in terms of emotion, in terms of the ramifications of that. And plus, a lot of people have deferred to quote-unquote experts, you know, the experts that they're presented on TV, telling them these straw man arguments, and they think that just because they're wearing a suit and they're presented as knowing what they're talking about, that they do, but they actually don't.
Exactly, and you know, and it's amazing how humans, including all of us, myself included, are easily deceived when another voice is being inserted into your head to do the critical thinking for you, and by that I'm talking about the mainstream media and the establishment media, just explaining to us how the buildings collapsed. I mean, I think you probably have seen the video. I don't know who the reporter is. I just recall watching a video on YouTube. I do as a young male from Fox News, standing nearby one of the towers after it collapsed, and there he is, just a few minutes later, just a few minutes after the collapse, explaining to us the details of the scientific process of how those towers came down, talking about explaining how the building came down from progressive collapse. Like he already knew it, and he's not even a scientist.
Well, Well, and anybody who could claim to know what happened on that specific day and have the explanation for you ready and packaged and to deliver really isn't practicing science. Nobody could know on that specific day until there was an analysis done, what had happened. And unfortunately, a lot of that evidence was gotten rid of after the event, so that we couldn't have a real scientific analysis of it, and that's part of the struggle that we're fighting now. So, you have to be aware, especially if something like this ever happens again, when they supposedly have a quote-unquote expert on the spot ready to tell you, what you just saw. You need to be wary of that and apply your own common sense and step back and look at it rationally and say, well, does this make sense to me? And that's what we ask you to do on this program too. Don't just believe us because we have our own experts. Look at it. Look at the government's arguments. Look at arguments of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and look at which one actually makes more sense to you.
Exactly, and you said something about, hey, take a look at the evidence, think on your own, and you alluded to that, and I got to tell you, that's the one thing you will never hear a National Institute of Standards and Technology say, or anybody representing that organization. It seems to be that's precisely what they do not want you to do, is to do any thinking on your own, and because of that, there was a law passed in 2002. It became law, and it's called the National Construction Safety Act that was passed by Congress that provided how shall we say it, the remedy to the problem that NIST was facing. And pardon me for being facetious, but, we're talking about the scientific method, and when you put a set of rules in place in the field of science that determines what is and what isn't, and you need to get around it, one of the ways to get around it is by simply passing a law that gives you the right and the legal standings for getting around the laws of science. But before we get into that, I just wanted to walk our audience once again through the scientific method and in a simplistic manner. And that is, the first step in the scientific method is to ask questions. Andy, I think a lot of people have taken a lot of heat over the last 11 years for simply asking questions.
Well, they have, and what's funny is, someday I may even write a book about this era of history and my own personal awakening, and one of the first things that caught my attention was how the supposed experts and the supposed media that says they're looking out for us would attack anybody that was asking reasonable questions. And it was, somebody would ask, like a Stephen Jones would ask, reasonable questions about the collapse of the World Trade Center 7. And he was proposing a hypothesis, and a hypothesis is an important part of the scientific method that you'll be going over. But just very reasonable questions about this event, and people would just jump on them. They would just shut down any kind of debate, any kind of question. And 9/11 is something that, to say that it affected the future of America in the 21st century would be an understatement. I mean, this killed nearly 3,000 of our own people. This set our domestic and our foreign policy that, to this day, so that we're still living under. So we have to ask questions, and people will say, and you hear these arguments, people will say that, it's, disrespectful to question the government. It's disrespectful to the victims' family members, which is completely false, because there's victims' family members that support us. But I say, no, it's a murder investigation.
Absolutely, it's a murder investigation, and anybody who has any sense of history, patriotism, any sense of order and law, and any appreciation for the Constitution that we have here in the U.S., or at least what's left of it, knows that nothing comes without a dissent, and everyone has the obligation to ask questions, and is very patriotic to ask questions, and it's the common sense thing to do. And with that said, the next step in the scientific method is called, at least we arbitrarily break it down, we simplify it for the audience, and the next step is to do the background research. And the scientist and the inquirer has the obligation to not only ask questions, but do the research. Find out what happened and what didn't happen, what was observed, visual, audio evidence, testimony evidence. Put it all together and construct a reasonable hypothesis. Whatever you think your hypothesis is. And Once that process is there, you talked a little bit about hypothesis. It simply says that it's a statement that you're making of what you think is, what you think, what you want to prove. You make that statement in your research of what you're looking for, what you think is, and your hypothesis will ultimately turn out to be true or not true. So in order to figure that out, the next step is to test the hypothesis with actual experiments.
And I'm going to interrupt you there, Bernie. Before we go on to that next step, I'm going to ask you a question. What was the result of NIST's tests for explosives in the case of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7?
Well, and that's a trick question, and the audience, some audience members probably know why that is, and some don't. And for those of you that don't, that's a trick question because what happened with the NIST investigation, and I'm just going to throw since you opened up this can of worms, what we find with NIST is what some call a circular logic. And the trick is NIST did not find any, they claimed that they did not find any evidence for explosives. And the trick question is, well, did you look for it? And the answer to that is no, they did not. And the next question is, how can you find something that you're not looking for? And to that, and I picked this up in a video, essentially the answer is, from NIST in so many words, there is no need to look for evidence because we see no need to look for it. It's essentially this circular logic. Oh, there is no need to look for it because there is no evidence to show that there's a need to look for it. It's kind of
well, it's ridiculous because in the case of World Trade Center 7 especially, is that this is the first time that we've ever had a steel frame, high-rise this big fall completely because of fire. So, if we've got this event that's happened for the first time in history, and you can see other big skyscrapers in other cities, other countries where they burn for hours and it looks like a torch and they leave the steel skeleton still in place. They don't fall. So this happened for the first time. So, just as part of your investigation, wouldn't you look for explosives just to rule it out, to understand that even if you want to think that it was Al-Qaeda that was responsible for this, to rule out that they may have gotten into the building somehow and did this, just so that you get a better understanding of how this event took place. But they didn't even bother to look for explosives because they had already a predetermined conclusion that they wanted to push, saying that, there were no explosives. Well, we can't look for explosives because they might throw that already predetermined conclusion out the window. So they did, already, and the reason I brought this up at this stage in the scientific method is to show you that even early on in the scientific method, they weren't following it because they didn't test for explosives.
Absolutely, and that's what this conversation is all about. We want to share with our audience. We want our audience to appreciate what we're saying here, and that is that if you bypass the basic rules of science, what you are left with are simply claims. And there was nothing to hold back, Hitler and the German Empire from making all the claims that they wanted. And there was nothing to hold back Stalin from making claims, or Mussolini, or any other empires of the past. There's nothing to hold back any country or any politician out there, historically speaking, from making any claims whatsoever if you're not going to hold them to the fire. And everybody has their own belief system, but it seems to me two things that come to mind that have been useful for holding individuals accountable to their words. One is the concept of morality. If something that someone is saying, there's a moral conflict, humanity will respond to that moral conflict. And the other thing that I can think of, at least, is science. When someone says something that doesn't hold up to the science, humanity will wake up to that. Hopefully, now in this day and age, we're breaking through that so that people will wake up to realize that the science and the rules of science have been violated here. And NIST NIST, as we have pointed out, chose to ignore the scientific method in their research, and instead they went straight for the, I guess what some people call the computer model science explanation of the World Trade Center collapse. But I know rumor has it, some people out there, some people call it junk science. I know others that call it the cartoon science and the fictitious science and the fill-in-your-blank science, but it's everything but the scientific method and is not based on actual experiments and data and reproducible evidence to make it to the next step of, as we speak about the scientific method, we talked about asking questions, we talked about doing background research, we talked about constructing a hypothesis and testing that hypothesis with experiments. The final steps in this process, known as the scientific method, means that you analyze the results, and then you draw conclusions based on the analysis of the results, which were based on the experiments that you conducted, which were based on the hypothesis that you wanted to put out. When you get those results, you analyze them, and from those results, you draw conclusions. And the scientific method has two ways that it ends. Either A, the hypothesis turns out to be true, based on the conclusions and the experiments and the data, or this hypothesis is false, or as some say, partially true. And either way, whether it's false or whether it's partially true, the researcher has the obligation to think, try it all over again, and just do it all over again. This is where we are. If you're NIST, you're staring down the barrel of having to do your experiments all over again. If you're part of the truth movement, what we have here is irrefutable, overwhelming evidence that the towers were brought down by controlled demolition. That is the most likely hypothesis. The evidence shows that. And as we said, the scientific method requires us to look at the most likely hypothesis, free from any political influence, and that includes media coverage and Hollywood and all other political influences, all of which are none of which are part of the actual scientific process. This is a very unique, pure process known as the scientific method.
Well, and what's crazy about the whole situation is that, we've come up with our own conclusions based on our own practicing of the scientific method, and you just stated it. But see, all we as an organization, for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, are doing is asking for NIST to test the hypothesis for explosives. Now, when I went to my congressman's office last year with his constituents, we gave the presentation. We didn't ask my congressman to come out and say that 9/11 was an inside job or point a finger at anybody. No, all we asked them to do was write a letter to NIST and ask them to test, ask them if they tested their own samples for explosives, and if they haven't, would they please do so? Very simple request from a person who was charged with overseeing the protection of the people of the United States. Now, they refused to do even that. That's all we asked them to do, is to ask them to test for it. Ask them to ask NIST to test for the explosives, but they refused to do that.
When you refer to NIST, you're referring to NIST. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which was tasked with investigating and figuring out how the towers came down. Go on.
Well, no, and see, that really just illustrates how crazy the situation is. Now, again, talking 11 years now from the event, it seems common sense that you would test for explosives. And it would almost, if somebody's new to this situation, it would almost seem like a no-brainer that they would have. That this would have been part of the investigation after 9/11 happened, but it wasn't. So the question then needs to be asked is, why aren't you? Why don't you? Why aren't you at least, if anything, if for any other reason than to shut people like me up, shut people like Bernie up, to shut up organizations like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, why wouldn't you do those tests? And we haven't really gotten an answer to that question.
Absolutely, and it's been so difficult to get any answers from NIST and the individuals that defend the NIST theories. This is part of the struggle, and if we do no less than making others and our audience aware of this battleground, this ground zero, grassroots battle for information, I think a lot of people will begin to awaken to what's really happening out there.
11 years after 9/11, experts are speaking out about what really destroyed the Twin Towers and Building 7.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to the descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the document from FEMA in Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report, issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
Your nearest screening of 9/11 explosive evidence, experts speak out, and purchase tickets. Go to 911expertspeakout.org.
Hey, this is Andy Steele from 9/11 Freefall. If you miss an episode of the show, you can go to www.911freefall.com and listen to our archive. Also, if you want to volunteer for Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, you can click the volunteer button on the left side of the page. If you don't have the internet but want to be part of the team, you can call us at 510-292-4515. That's 510-292-4515. The line is open 24/7. Remember, don't be afraid to speak the truth, because the power of truth is greater than the power of the lie.
We talked about architects and engineers, and I want to highlight again, these are individuals that have families and jobs and commitments, and they make time to commit portions of their lives to this battle of information that we face. And when you have a government that answers to no one and subverts the scientific method and dodges and gets around questions and just simply does not give the people an answer, this is cause for concern. And one need not be a conspiracy theorist to appreciate what we're talking about. We're talking about basic science, physics 101, people. Everyone listening should appreciate some of the most basic rules of science. And when these basic rules of science are being violated, that is cause for concern, absolutely. So that is the issue with the scientific method. But Andy, I got to tell you, and you probably know this already, but for the sake of our audience, NIST did respond to the challenge in a different way. And if you're wondering how they did that, it did not involve the scientific method, but it did involve some pretty fancy little videos. And as a person, I myself have some background in programming, and I know you deal with a lot of files, and you have a little background there with technology, as a lot of us do. And amazing, if we had only known in the past that somehow, according to the NIST, we wouldn't need the scientific method. We simply need to write programs that recreate a reality for us, and have building destroying itself through the path of most resistance, even though it can't happen in real life, but it is very possible when you resort to computer animation. And One thing I want to bring up today is that NIST did not only provide us with some incredible computer animation, but they also came up with a law that protected them from being essentially challenged in a scientific method kind of way. I'm referring to the National Construction Safety Act of 2002. And this is one of the issues that we want to share with our audience today. We encourage our audience to Google National Construction Safety Act. And in 2002, this went into effect, Andy, and what it essentially did, it's essentially paved the road for NIST to not only take full control of the 9/11 investigation, but they also took control of the scientific method part of it. They actually gave a full authoritarian control of the investigation of 9/11 in a quote-unquote trust us kind of way, or maybe that's, if you want to put it that way. Essentially, NIST is asking and begging the world to trust them with their computerized analysis that completely went around the scientific method, and they simply recreated computer analysis of how the towers came down. And if anyone out there wants to know how they came up with their data, don't hold your breath, because one of the things that the National Construction Safety Act of 2002 allowed NIST to do, it allowed the NIST to essentially withhold any evidence, any data, or anything that was used to come to their conclusions on the World Trade Center collapse, the incredible computerized simulated collapse that the world is so comfortable with now for many, many years. This is the NIST argument, and it is founded and grounded in computer model science. And this is one of the things that we want to share with our audience today. It did not ask questions. It did not do background research. There was no constructing of hypothesis. Well, there was a hypothesis, but it was a pre-conclusion. It's one thing to start with a pre-conclusion and move backwards to find partial evidence that may support your pre-conclusion hypothesis. It is quite another to do the research and create an educated hypothesis based on the most likely scenario and based on the hard evidence that is available. So I wanted to share that. And this National Construction Safety Act, essentially, it gave the power to NIST to conceal their results. And the way that they did it, the wording in this act basically states essentially that if they deem subjectively that evidence and data and experiments, releasing that evidence and the data and experiments to the scientific community, never mind the American public who is entitled to that information, if they subjectively deemed that the information was a threat to security somehow, they could justify not releasing that. So our audience should be aware that 11 years later, the country is not entirely on board with 9/11 truth because of this one act that essentially allowed NIST to conceal and continue moving forward with a computerized model that basically justifies this incredible progressive collapse of 110 stories barreling through the path of most resistance with two of the buildings, and of course with Building 7, a 47-story tower barreling, imploding on itself through the path of most resistance in a building that wasn't hit by any plane and had just minor fires. And not that it matters how much fires there were, because we do know, historically speaking, fires simply don't compromise buildings to fall not only suddenly and symmetrically and spontaneously, but also at a speed that showed no deceleration whatsoever. What a near free fall collapse, or essentially free fall collapse through the path of most resistance. It just cannot be explained in real science, but it can be explained in computer model science.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to ask the audience to do a little bit of homework tonight on Google. Type in NIST denies access to WTC7 data, and you should find an article that comes up in any number of sites. But and it's just a very quick article where information was requested about NIST computer models. And I'm just going to read it verbatim from the article. This was the response. It says, finding regarding public safety information. And this is what NIST cited. Pursuant to Section 7D of the National Construction Safety Team Act, I hereby find that the disclosure of the information described below, received by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, in connection with its investigation of the technical causes of the collapse of World Trade Center Towers and World Trade Center Building 7 on September 11th, might jeopardize public safety. Therefore, NIST shall not release the following information. This is what they refused to release, saying that this is going to jeopardize public safety. Number one, all input and results of files of the ANSYS 16-story collapse initiation model with detailed connection models that were used to analyze the structural response to thermal loads, break element source codes, ANSYS script files for the break elements, custom executable, ANSYS file, and all Excel spreadsheets and other supporting calculations used to develop the floor connection failure modes and capacity. So what did I just say? Basically what they used to determine the outcome of their scientific model. And then all input files with connection material properties and all result files of the LS-DYNA 47-story global collapse model that were used to simulate sequential structural failures leading to collapse, and all Excel spreadsheets and other supporting calculations used to develop floor connection failure modes and capacity. So that's basically a lot of words, very technical sounding, but they're asking them for the data that they use to make up their computer model to justify their explanation. And now, NIST was denying releasing this information because they say it'll jeopardize public safety. Anytime that we have any kind of a disaster, let's say that you're not skeptical of the official story, but you want to understand how did this happen. I mean, again, it was the first time that it had ever happened in history, a failure, of like this, where the 47-story building just falls in controlled demolition style. Let's say you want to analyze how did this happen, why did this happen, so we can prevent this from happening again. Because disasters get studied for hundreds of years afterwards. There's still people talking about how the Titanic sunk. Okay, so you want to get this information. You want to just understand how NIST is justifying its explanation, but they're denying it, and they're saying this will jeopardize public safety. Now, come on, how does that make sense in any kind of world where people think logically, or any kind of world where people think at all? It doesn't make any sense, okay? So right there, your alarm should be going off and asking, well, why can't we have this data? How in the heck does it jeopardize public safety?
Exactly, and I do appreciate that input and that reading that piece there, and this is what we want to share with our audience, and it's amazing. Obviously, there is no interest with NIST to follow the scientific method, and what we're going to do, go ahead and we want to remind our audience to go ahead and go to 911freefall.com, and what we've done, we've put a few links in there talking about the scientific method and talking about the National Construction Safety Act. So go ahead and you'll see those links on that site. Go ahead and click on those if you want to become more informed on the issues that we're talking about. And I also want to say, while we're talking about 9/11 truth, and we talked earlier about architects and engineers, and I know that Richard Gage and Architects and Engineers, they have one presentation called Blueprint for Truth, where the scientific method is very pleasantly applied and very meticulously applied to this event. And when one applies the scientific method, and we're talking about just meticulously dealing with every piece of evidence and talk about most likely hypothesis, one cannot conclude anything other than controlled demolition of the towers. The hypothesis, we know that they initially claimed that the building came down in this pancake theory, and then they kind of adjusted that claim to the so-called pile driver theory. And of course, the pile driver theory that they stand behind now violates every principle of some of the basic laws of science, including Newton's laws. And we'll talk a little more about that. I know we talked a little bit about Newton's laws in the past, and we'll talk more about that in the future. But what else are you going to do when you're circumventing the scientific method? You have to resort to lesser possibilities. The pile driver theory, for those that have never heard of it, that is the theory that the 9/11 official story is grounded in, and it is all illustrated very nicely in the computer model simulations of the World Trade Center collapse. And in these theories and these models, in these computer simulations, amazingly, the floors are just taken out one after another without any resistance whatsoever, without any deceleration of the impact from one floor to the other, no deceleration whatsoever, like it's not even there. And the energy is being removed by simply the process of gravity, and that's something that is inconsistent with nature, inconsistent with Newton's laws, and any form of reality. You're going to get deceleration when the one floor runs into the other, and there has to be some other force outside of gravity removing the energy, Andy, that is already there. These floors are very solid. They hold exponentially more of their weight than the weight that it is. These connectors and these floors are designed to hold a lot of weight, and any computer model that has the resistance of the lower floors being removed at speed has to be questioned.
Well, you're absolutely right, Bernie. And, kind of bring this back to Building 7 for just a moment, because this is going to show just where NIST fails completely. Just one example. And this, you don't have to be an engineer to understand this, but if, again, go do a quick Google search and you can look up NIST Floor 12 fire simulation. And what it does is it shows where NIST simulation shows that where they had said at one point that where the building collapsed, at 5:20, it shows in their simulation these raging fires in a section of the building. But then when you actually look at the photographic evidence of the building at 3:50 p.m., and they show the exact same point in the building where in NIST's model they show raging fire, hot fire going on, the fire is out. You can see right in the window the fire is out. So right there you have a flaw in their models, okay? So that should throw out their models and make them go back to the drawing board and try again, all right? But they're not going to do that. They're going to elude, and they're going to try to spin this in order to not answer this question. And what I want to put a visualization in the audience's mind of what NIST is doing. And I want you to imagine NIST, to imagine it as a traveler, somebody who goes on vacation. And let's say that while on this vacation they buy something that's really bulky, like a big teddy bear for their girlfriend at home, right? Now, they want to get on the airplane, but they're only allowed one carry-on, and they've already got their carry-on. They don't want to check it. So what they're going to do is they're going to take this big bulky item that they want to bring home and not check. They want to put it in a suitcase, right? But it doesn't fit in the suitcase. So what NIST is doing essentially is they're stuffing it into a suitcase, and they're jumping on it, on the top of it. They're trying to zip around, and when they can't, they'll just kind of cut the ear off the teddy bear, so it's not even like the full teddy bear, just the stuff in it. That's what NIST is doing with this explanation. They're starting with the conclusion, so they have a box they got to fit this into, and so they're jumping on it furiously, up and down, red face, saying, "Oh no, I can get it in," but they're really not. And because of this, they're not really practicing any real science. And so I wanted to put that visualization in your mind, because that is a perfect explanation of what they're doing.
Exactly, and I got to thank you, Andy, for that visualization. I keep thinking of the poor teddy bear getting crushed into this suitcase, but only I keep thinking that the teddy bear is really the rights of America and American values and things like that being crushed by this computerized model, which is justifying this story that we know now as the official story of 9/11, where 19 terrorists outsmarted the world's greatest military force in the history of the world, and these guys did it from caves. And
defied the laws of physics. And what's really sad about this is that, the American people trust their government. They did, and they were very traumatized after that day, and they looked to their government to provide the answers and to tell them the truth. And the deception is at least 50% of the crime, if not more of it. And unfortunately, we have to do the government's job for it. We have to do the media's job for them in bringing this to you. And all I ask the public to do is look at the evidence and make your own conclusions. Again, don't listen to me, don't listen to Bernie, don't listen to anyone but yourself, and ask yourself what makes the most sense and look at it rationally.
Absolutely, and that goes right back to the first step of the scientific method. So to our audience, if you're asking questions, you're already part of the scientific method, because that is the first step in the scientific method, is to ask questions. So ironically, in today's world, people are demonized for asking questions. It's almost like they're saying, how dare you take the first step in the scientific method of asking questions? Don't ask questions. So ironically, that is the first step of the scientific method. And what else can we say? I really wanted to highlight that today in today's show, Andy, is to let our audience know that there was a law actually passed. And, we talked about the National Construction Safety Act, and this is I guess an arduous period of a fight between what some call the New Jersey girls, right? Is that their name? Fighting for the rights of the family victims. And had it not been for these ladies in New Jersey, we wouldn't even be talking about an investigation. We wouldn't even be talking about NIST. I mean, this is a battle that they put up. They didn't even want to do an investigation of 9/11, and it was after a lot of strong-arming that finally some kind of commission was put together, and the subsequent investigations. So again, this is issues of concern for our nation and for the truth and the future for all of us.
Well, and what that illustrates too is that there had to be a struggle just for the 9/11 Omission Commission to be to be set up. So I hear a lot of this too, where again, emotion is our enemy in this fight, because the other side will try to use emotion and throw up these arguments and say this is disrespectful to the families and, how dare you? Whereas 9/11 victims' family members were the first ones asking questions, and they're asking questions now. And we have another organization called RememberBuilding7.org, and they are endorsing architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth and their new movie, Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. I get emails from them regularly, and they're throwing their support behind it, and they're asking the same questions. And one of the lines that they put out in their commercials, because they've had commercials playing in New York City, is, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a father. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a uncle, I'm a wife. Okay, so, I want the audience to put that out of their head right now. We are supported by victims' family members, and I'd like to get some on in future episodes to talk with us, because they are asking these same questions, and they are demanding the same answers.
Well, absolutely. Big effort there in New York. RememberBuilding7.org, is it? RememberBuilding7.org?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that was a big effort, and a lot of these efforts are happening nationwide. And what do we say? Let's talk a little bit about the Experts Speak Out. I know we've talked about it the last few shows. We're going to continue talking about this nationwide tour that Architects and Engineers is a big part of, because it's Richard Gage going out there, and it's an Architects and Engineers tour. We want our audience to know, and it's called it's a tour for the 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. That's the name of the presentation, and this presentation with one expert after another talking about everything that we're talking about and a lot more. This thing is going on nationwide. It has been going on around the country since going back to May 21st in San Diego, and it went from California to Washington State, all to Oregon. They hit Nevada, Tempe, Arizona. We were in New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, New York, different parts of New York, Rhode Island, went to Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and it's coming around the East Coast right now. We have Saturday the 30th, the presentation will be in Florida, in Daytona Beach, Florida, and then it goes on July 2nd to Atlanta, Georgia. July 3rd will be Nashville, Tennessee. July 5th, 11th will be Bozeman, Montana, is it? And it swings around to California, Alameda, California on July 9th, and then ends in San Francisco July 11th. Now that schedule is subject to change, but right now it looks pretty solid. That's what's on the schedule. If we do add any cities, we'll definitely bring that up in the next show.
Right, and if you go to 911expertspeakout.org, you can keep up with the schedule and buy tickets, so you need to be looking there. But I want to tell you about something that really filled me with joy. I saw it on the internet. You know, I said in previous episodes that we need to be the media, we need to be citizen journalists, and I encourage people to go out and, write reviews on Experts Speak Out, go out and try to interview Richard Gage if he's at these, in your city. And I saw somebody doing just that on YouTube. Citizen journalist went up to Richard and asked him questions and, got that out on YouTube. I want everybody doing that. I want you writing reviews for your new local newspapers, write them on your blogs. I want you to get the word out, and I want you to spread the information about Experts Speak Out, spread the information that Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth puts out to everybody that you can, and use your talents to do that.
Right. We do appreciate that, and I appreciate you bringing that up, and we want to bring some of the activities that Architects and Engineers and just the 9/11 Truth Movement in general, we want to just put stuff out there. I was inspired, Andy. I read an email just today. First of all, I want to mention to our audience that Architects and Engineers, a lot of people do write in questions. I'm sure a lot of our audience, they have questions about this topic. Maybe they don't understand. Maybe they don't agree with something that was said here at the show or at another show. So people constantly write letters, and a lot of people write letters asking questions. A lot of people write letters to us just expressing their feelings about the topic. And I read an email the other day from someone, and I want to just read some of that here on the show, just so people can appreciate the kind of people that are writing to Architects and Engineers, and just people that have questions and people that have seen enough, and they see what's happening and they want to be involved. And this one letter comes from, I won't say the person's name, but someone with the initials JM, and I'll read some of this. It says, the dearth and inaccuracy of reporting on the events of 9/11 are the prime reason my wife and I no longer are contributing members of NPR. The overwhelming evidence that has been amassed by many credible scholars, scientists, and journalists show that something is terribly wrong with the official story, and yet this vital information is only available on independent sites on the internet and largely unknown by readers and listeners of the mainstream media. I urge the BBC to be pioneers of this issue, to stop the blackout of important and courageous research that challenges the credibility of the official 9/11 account, and live up to your stated editorial values. This person obviously expressing some feelings there about the censorship of the truth, and obviously this person has given up on NPR, but it's not just NPR. As we know, we've talked about the censorship, and you just mentioned, Andy, a minute ago about the alternative media, and we have to be the media, and that's what this person's echoing. It's amazing, people. Those of you, a lot of people are listening to us, they know about this issue. They want to know what they can do. Obviously, we've mentioned Architects and Engineers, and go ahead and going to that website, and there's a lot of volunteer opportunities there. And I remind people, you are the change. If you're listening to this broadcast and you agree with what we're saying, and this short radio broadcast, I should say, right, Andy? If you agree with us, you are part of this movement, and you are part of this resistance, if you want to call it that, or whatever you want to call it, this revolution of truth, that we need to get the science out there, the truth about what happened on 9/11, and quit this nonsense. We've been here for 11 years, and our media sits there sitting on their hands, and they're not doing anything about it, so we have to be the media, and that's why we're coming to you with this show and letting you know about the things that are being done about the truth, not only Architects and Engineers, but every one of our lives. Andy, I can't say enough about what we need to do to get this truth out there.
Exactly, and we only got a minute left in our show, but I want to just throw it out again. You can go to ae911truth.org and volunteer. If you want to listen to old broadcasts and you want to to volunteer from our other page, 911freefall.com, you can do that. And if you don't got a computer, you don't have internet, you can give us a call. Phone number is 510-292-4515. I'll repeat it one more time, 510-292-4515, and you can you can join the team from there too. The line is open 24/7. So if you're listening to this broadcast at 3 in the morning, give it a call, leave us a message, and we'll get back in touch with you.
Okay, and we want to remind our audience, if you want to know more about the tour, when you do go to ae911truth.org, go ahead and click on the banner that you see right in the center of that page. It says 9/11 Experts Speak Out Tour 2012, going from May 21st to July 11th. Go ahead and click on the map. It's a image of a map. Go ahead and click on that, and you'll get all the information you need as to where the tour is going and how you can be a part of that tour. And as we said, there's a lot of ways of volunteering with architects and engineers, and a lot of ways that people can volunteer and do action in their own lives, just on their own. So, okay, with that said, Andy, we thank you for all your input to the show. I want to thank our audience, members, and we want to thank all the volunteers of architects and engineers and Richard Gage and everyone that's making this happen. Until then, let's keep doing this, and please join us next time. We're going to find different topics of 9/11 to talk about. This week we chose to focus on the basics of the scientific method and some of the basics of the National Construction Safety Act, which acted as a roadblock to simply get around the scientific method. And unless we can appreciate the most basic elements of this battle of information, it's very hard to fight the battle. So with that said, I'm Bernie Suarez. I'm here with Andy Steele. And until next time, this is 9/11 Free Fall. And have a great evening, and goodbye.